So good morning, Borodar, Crioso. Welcome to the first event from Welsh Government, Transport for Wales and Cenex joint. Hopefully this will lead on to a series of other events, but I'll start straight away. So my name is Gordon Brown. Apologies if anyone was actually logging in expecting to see an ex-Prime Minister or anything similar like that. So I'm a project manager looking after the service desk for the decarbonisation team for Transport for Wales. I'm just doing the kind of the overview, the housekeeping and the introductions, and then we'll go around. But the agenda is as was issued out. So we'll run through the purpose of the meeting from Karine and then go on to our vision, our strategy at Transport for Wales and some of the tools that we're aware of and what's there. We'll then hand over to Cenex, who are here to actually show their digital tools on what they can do and how that works. Rachel from our team will then give us an update on the current rollout, and then we'll finish up with a knowledge repository centre from Cenex and some questions at the end, time permitting. So hopefully we get through quite quickly. As the slide says, we're here to present digital tools and resources to help you, the Welsh local authorities and other public bodies, I know there's others here as well, with the rollout of the energy, the EV infrastructure and delivery. The highlights will be the Insights Toolkit, which gives a quantitative analysis, the knowledge repository for qualitative guidance, case studies and real-world applications. So housekeeping, normally we go on to fire alarms and tea and coffee, but hopefully you've sorted that out yourselves. If you can mute your microphones, but keep your cameras on where the service and the digital broadband is sufficient. It's good to actually be able to speak to people and see people reacting. Any questions, if you can use the chat bar on the right-hand side, or we've got slides at the end of each session, so you can raise a hand there and we'll try and make sure that we pick up on everything, time permitting. And as you'll have noticed, we're recording the session and the slides and the recording will be issued out to all attendees following the event. So if you have registered with ourselves, you'll get a copy of that. If you haven't, please send the email through. So I'll now pass over to Karine to start the welcome.
Turn my microphone on, it's better. Well, good morning, everyone, and it's great to see so many of you attending this meeting, so thank you very much. I believe that we, which include yourselves alongside other delivery partners, have the opportunity to lead by example and help build a reliable, efficient EV charging network in Wales, transforming the way residents and visitors travel. As we set out to accelerate the rollout of EV charging across Wales, TFW and I have explored how the EV charging strategy and action plan will be delivered in practice. To achieve this, we've developed a program-level roadmap setting out actions across 5 key priorities for Welsh Government, Transport for Wales and delivery partners over the next 3 to 5 years. And we see this as being pivotal to the successful acceleration of the infrastructure across Wales and to meet the KPI set in the strategy for Wales. So I'm proposing to share the details of this roadmap and priorities with you by email once I've had responses or approval from ministers. This may possibly become the subject of another meeting with you all in the near future if you'd like to discuss in more details. So one of the 5 key priorities is for Welsh Government, Transport for Wales to provide support, tools, guidance to enable you and the private sector to deliver the right infrastructure across Wales, or our so-called preferred network. So the purpose of this meeting is to introduce you to Cenex and their Nevis tools, giving you access to expertise that will help you progress the development and the delivery of your respective local EV charging infrastructure strategy. We're using reliable, independent, up-to-date information on EVs and on EV charging infrastructure. So please enjoy the presentation and seize this as an opportunity and a platform to ask as many questions and share your views very openly. Thank you.
Thank you, Corinne. Back to me and Steve to run through the Transport for Wales vision, strategy and tools. So the service desk that I'm in charge with, the aspiration of the service desk is to remove as many of the barriers and hurdles that are out there to actually allow you to install the EV charging infrastructure in the most effective way, utilising the skills base and the stakeholders we've got working with Transport for Wales and to provide that optimum value. The hope is we become one form of a one-stop shop, a touchstone for local authorities, public bodies, charities, third sectors. I know there's health officers on the call as well, but WLGA, CLAW, Welsh Government, Cadw are here, and try and link all of those teams and disparate bodies together to actually end up with the optimum solution for Wales. We want to provide the forum and events such as these to share the knowledge and learning and understanding that some people already have and others are after. And we will also be monitoring and reviewing the progress and the possible opportunities coming, looking at the holistic aspects of decarbonisation, that's not a word, I don't think, decarbonising transport, active travel, hydrogen, and those other bodies, just to make sure that we're picking up on all the aspects there. So quite a few of you will have already met me. We've actually tried to have liaison meetings with most of the local authorities. That graph just on the right-hand side shows where we've been, but only virtually, unfortunately. Hopefully I can get around a little bit more afterwards. We've also worked with the Engagement Centre within Transport for Wales to offer bilingual back office support to make sure that we pick up on that. We've interfaced with the Isle of Anglesea's questionnaire that I think was sent out to most of the chief surveyors and has been answered by some, to ensure that all the information that we do bring is actually kind of what is required and fits in hand in glove with other information there. We've also met up with Cardiff City Region, the Swansea Bay City Deals and the county surveyors. So the hope is that we can start to bring towards everyone this kind of offering. We're beginning to roll out, so the next steps, we're beginning to roll out with health and education, manufacturing and innovation departments within the Welsh Government, but also large private bodies and, to be honest, anyone else involved in the actual delivery of the infrastructure. We've started to meet up with the charge point providers and we'll continue to do so as more come around, because the industry is like that. There will be some that we're already using. There'll be the ones that we don't want to lose as well. And we're not trying to provide another hurdle for you, but we will continue with the data collection on the early basis in line with the reporting against the recent ULEV funding to make sure that the actual delivery and what we're actually doing is there. But that last line is very important. It's down to what you actually need from us. That's the bit that we're after, is like, we could turn around and pick up elements, but it's to make sure that you actually get what you need. Can I come back to you, Dylan, in the questions at the end?
Yeah, sorry, okay.
Okay, no problem. So one of the early successes was the bilingual support. So within Transport for Wales, we obviously have bilingual support for the buses and the trains. So we've now offered this forward to 2 or 3 service point providers, one of which has certainly taken it up. And the idea of this is make sure that we've got inclusion within the tenderers to say that this information is there, to make sure that we reduce the drop-off between the expressions of interests and the actual tenders and the actual partnerships we make. If the Welsh language is a problem, we feel like we've got a solution for that. Not to say you have to use them, but it is there and the contact points are there. And as I say, the slides will be out. If you want to write this in, then get hold of Sian or Katie. And I'll pass over to Steve.
Many thanks for that overview of the service desk, Gordon. And yes, good to see so many people on this call. It's great to have this level of attendance, and I hope we can make this time really useful. And part of that making useful is looking kind of beyond how do we sort of package what we are here to do, I suppose, in TFW to make it legible to you. And the way we've done that is to say, you know, what is our purpose in this? And it's moving away, I suppose, from only being involved in direct delivery of charge points, which we've done and we're still doing, and we'll hear a little bit more about that from Rachel. Learned some really useful lessons about how different stakeholders best interact with each other. And as well, obviously, the work that Gordon's done engaging with so many of you, I think, has given us a really clear idea now of the kind of things that we should be getting involved in to make the whole process of delivery easier. So that is really what our purpose is. It's about enabling that effective planning and especially collaboration. A lot of it is kind of information and knowledge and almost education sharing, really. And it is about focusing on how we can, I suppose, more effectively target public sector funding on those key areas that maybe meet those wider social goals beyond the immediate ability of commercial entities to deliver in specific sites, but also, I suppose, looking at how far we can push and facilitate the commercial sector to deliver, how we can make those conversations when the commercial sector comes to you and say, we've got a proposal. What do you do about that? What about all the other ones or other companies that might have proposals? And how can we make tendering more effective, for example? So this suite of tools is really to assist everyone, both in the public and the private sector, to be able to plan, to be able to coordinate better, and to be able to target that investment more effectively where it can make that greater impact. So do you want to move on, Gordon? I'll talk a little bit about some of these. So some of these things are going to be quite familiar to you. You should have had a draft of the National Infrastructure Standards now, which is obviously awaiting final sign-off. Equality's impact is something that we think will work very well with that, and we just need to do a little bit more work on it. The network mapping tool I'll talk a little bit more about in a second as well. So Gordon, can you move to the next slide and we'll just go straight into that. Thank you. So some of you will have had some level of exposure to this, and we're very much on a version 1 here. So what is a network mapping tool? When we talk about a preferred network, what we're meaning is not something that we're being prescriptive about and saying, we've got a plan for Wales and charges need to go into locations A, B, and C. What we're there to do is to be able to identify opportunities, really, in a geographical sense. So what we have is version 1, I suppose, at the moment, of a web-based tool where we can assess different scenarios and different types of charging and rank them really to give you some sense that within your local authority area, your boundary, how does that compare with other areas in your local authority area and also with the rest of Wales, to kind of give it a ranking. And that is at the moment for 3 scenarios where we look at sites that might be the most commercially attractive. So that'll give you some sense of where we should be having conversations with private industry. Where additional grid capacity would be useful. So that's looking at if we did some investment in substations or grid reinforcement, that could help us unlock a lot of really key and very attractive sites. And then I suppose the remainder where we see, again, back to the idea that there's wider social goals that need to be addressed here, and we don't want kind of black spots, where we should actually then be prioritizing public sector investment to fill in those gaps. And what we are hoping we would be able to do, obviously, is to break that down in some ways by on-street and by destination en route charging. So we know the kind of use cases that we're talking about. There's quite a lot of data layers that have gone into this, a wide variety of factors. And we're aware, obviously, other parts of the UK have tools like this. But what we want to do is to make this as interactive as possible and to give you really good outputs that will give you some sense of where do we start. Let's go to the next slide, please, Gordon. A little bit more about some of these tools. The renewables co-location tool gives us some sense of the commercial cases, a financial case for co-location of solar PV, whether that's rooftop or canopy and wind. But also about battery storage as well. So kind of looking at how we can create, almost self-sustaining charging infrastructure. Community consultation is something that I don't think I've seen any examples of elsewhere. But I think this is quite important, and it's about consultation on many levels. And this may actually be spread across other documents, but in a way, I think it's really important to think how we engage, thinking about the Wellbeing Act, how we can engage communities better in delivery of infrastructure, so the infrastructure doesn't just appear without warning. So that's thinking of really anything from the street environment and how we can engage local authorities can engage residents more effectively to create buy-in for the on-street environment, so it's not so kind of difficult to deliver, right up to maybe thinking about rapid charging hubs, which not necessarily for local residents, of course, thinking about through traffic and stop off. The people who live in that area probably rightly want to have a say about how that's delivered. So that kind of works together with the national standards and communication. So this is something that we think will be hopefully very useful to sort of, make sure everyone's engaged. In the national procurement framework, again, it's still very much in development, but the idea is that we create a single procurement framework. And for me, I think the key thing is that we overcome some of the limitations that we've seen in some of the procurement frameworks that are out there already, learn a lot of the lessons about some of the procurement you've been doing and what's worked and what hasn't, and really providing that balance between flexibility that we provide, not over specifying what we do, so we kind of frighten the commercial sector off, but also having enough specification so that we feel we're able to monitor and manage performance effectively. So that, I think, will be a really useful piece of work when it comes to fruition. Can I have the next slide again, please, Gordon? So nearly there. So the guidance on standards and bilingual considerations, really that, I suppose, wraps up through the help desk as well that Gordon's just discussed. Two key things, I think, are about working groups. So we have this thing called the Task and Finish group. And really what we're looking for is almost like a troubleshooting group where we can facilitate really useful and open conversations between the private and the public sector. So we expect this would have, a healthy representation of the different components of the commercial charging industry, but also the ability to feed back through the public sector in terms of what works, how we have those commercial conversations, how we are able to look at things that may be beyond procurement, things like just lease only, that kind of thing. So hopefully that'll be really useful. And also mentioned, of course, in the Welsh Government Action Plan was what we call the Connections Group, which is really doing the same thing, I suppose, for the DNOs, so National Grid and Scotch Power, and giving them, I suppose, information that they need to be able to plan the grid effectively when they know what's coming. And you can see, of course, how that could link to the Idealist network and preferred network tool that we have available. Knowledge repository, won't say any more about that. That's what we're here to discuss after this. And of course, the funding packages that you'll all be familiar of and how we can make them as useful as possible, how we can, reduce the barriers to engaging with the on-street residential charge point scheme, for example, and be able to bridge that with ULEV as we have at the moment. So next slide, please, Gordon. I think we're done, yes.
Yeah, so Dylan, I mean, you did put your hand up a while back. Do you want to?
Yeah, thanks. Just in terms of the question you posed earlier regarding what we need, from our local authority perspective, I'm just curious to understand what support is available from a procurement perspective, from a consultancy, to support the development of sites and so forth, and also on the delivery, installation of charging points, where it's on leasehold basis or concession agreements or whatever. Just the barriers to us is going through that procurement steps to secure companies to help us in that rollout in a way. So I was wondering, are there frameworks or documentations that's already been done as templates that we could utilize to go take us through that process? I'm just wondering, if you're working with Cenex now, is that something that local authorities can access as on a direct award basis? I was wondering, how does it work logistically? Thanks.
Okay. I mean, Steve, do you want to pick up on the first bit, and then Corinne, do you want to answer the last question about the Cenex involvement?
Yeah, happy to,
Yeah.
Gordon. So the first bit being about procurement, I guess. So yeah, I mean, really, again, Dylan, through the tools that we were talking about there, there's both obviously the national framework, which we think will make it an awful lot easier to have consistent engagement with the private sector, and also hopefully actually provide some level of economy of scale in a way, in that the commercial sector isn't having to deal with multiple different frameworks all the time, so if it's useful, we want to make it useful so that people feel able to use it, but also that task and finish group we talked about with the commercial sector. I think there are a number of hidden barriers in there on both sides, and again, a lot of it might just be about communication and knowledge sharing. So I want to see how far those kind of conversations get us, and being able to raise points that we can, address in that.
There are timescales on that, because I'm currently working well with Rachel Lewis on preparing our own documentation and so forth at the moment. But yeah, I don't want to do a lot of work, so if that is forthcoming in the short term, but or if it's that more of a long-term ambition.
Yeah, I'll leave Karine to talk about the timescales. I think it's looking at the summer, are we?
Yeah, that is a plan. So yeah, we've had a bit of delay due to needed to bring in additional technical expertise to progress the work. So yes, the plan currently is summer. But what we'll do is work with procurement team to over the next couple of weeks and try and see and communicate with you a clear timeline and what we should be able to present to you and when. So that's
Okay,
it.
thank you.
With regard to the second point, so we've discussed, so obviously depending on your interest in accessing, following this meeting, in accessing the tool, we've got a plan which and the proposition is for us as Welsh Government to fund the first year of you accessing the Nevis tools. The way we were proposing to do that is that instead of each local authority going independently, approaching Cenex separately, we have discussed with the WLGA the possibility for one lead local authority to commission Cenex on behalf of all of you, and so that we have obviously a platform that suits all your needs, but we only have one transaction. So as it stands, I think RCT has kindly agreed to act as a lead authority, and in discussion with Chris, there is a way for local authorities to procure Cenex directly. So in principle, it should be fairly straightforward. But before and we should be able to do that pretty quickly. But obviously, we're waiting for you to give us some feedback following this meeting to see if you're all happy with this approach and take it forward.
Okay, thank you, Dylan.
And sorry, and
Sorry.
I should say, I've got budget for this. You'll be sick of me saying this, subject to ministerial approval, but I'm expecting that approval to come in hopefully next week. So I'm going to say in the next couple of weeks, but all approval in relation to ULEV and this I'll let you know, it'll come at the same time, but there is budget available for that.
Okay, thank you, Karine. Dylan, does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I'll look forward to further discussions on both counts, I think. Yeah, thank you.
Lovely. Mark, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. The question I've got really is about network resilience, really, and National Grid. It's about how much involvement we got with them, because one of the costs is connectivity or connections to the grid, and that can be quite high, especially when you've got rapid chargers and so forth. So, the actual installation of the actual EV charge points, I think that we can procurement for that, but it's the National Grid. So we've started discussing with National Grid about their what their proposals are for upgrading the grid to cope with the additional EV charge point. I'm just wondering whether you have actually had any discussions with them as well.
If I pick that up first and then pass on to Rachel, probably would be best. But Mark, where are you based? North or south of Wales?
Pembrokeshire, sorry.
Pembrokeshire. So we've got SPN, Scottish Power in the north, and what is now National Grid used to be Western Power in the south. So, but there is the same issue with both of them, and that element of network resilience that you raised. I mean, Rachel, would you?
Yeah, no problem. So I sit on the customer relations board for both National Grid and SPEN. So we're aware of what they're doing, what they're proposing. They've also reached out to us, their engagement officer, to find out what our plans are so we can feed that into them. So we're working with them on the idealized network that we Steve just spoke about, the preferred network, so that they've got some sight as to what we think we're going to need and where. Things changed in April. I don't know whether you're aware that you don't have to pay for a full upgrade now. So if a substation's required, you only have to pay for the part that you need, which will make connections a lot easier. They won't make them quicker because they'll still need to do the reinforcement. But what it will mean is that you'll just have to pay for the part that you need. So that'll make some of these schemes that probably weren't viable now. That came in the 1st of April. But yes, we do engage with SPEN and National Grid regularly, and we're making them aware of large schemes and things that we're doing.
Yeah, we've had meetings with National Grid on the April regulation. We were still trying to pick our way through that, right, regarding exactly what it means and what does it mean for the end user, because it's devil in the detail really. But it's, you know, previously the cost of a new install was very prohibitive for us, especially in our rural parts where we try to get our skeleton up. But we're still trying to work through the detail of that. And that's why my second question was in relation to on-street charge points. And I've also, my role is parking manager and street care manager, so I've got concerns about this, but the civil side and the amount of work it needs on street and how we do that, about trailing cables as well, because I still don't think there's an industry solution out there yet. We've installed a lot of EV charge points in car parks, which is great, parking spaces regulated, you know, nice and tidy, but on street is still a concern in relation to trailing cables. And I've actually linked up with West Sussex, I think it is, County Council, who they've got a trial called connect to curb. I don't think some people might be with, and I've got another meeting there. So I'd just like to get some information really on how people are envisaging this for the sort of on-street charging, because I think that's a barrier for us at the moment, is get our heads around how we do that. And, you know, some people are going off street lighting columns, which is a bit, you know, I don't think that quite works. So I'd like to, that's an open question really about on-street parking charge points. Sorry, thank you.
So it's interesting. It's something that we're starting to work on. So there are lots of solutions. There's probably about 9 or 10 different on-street solutions, and it's not easy. It's probably more contentious around residents as well. So there's lots of things to think about. But we have started to put together some information of what's available out there in the industry, and yeah, we're hoping to put that together as a bit of a paper that we can share with all the Welsh local authorities, just so that everyone's aware of all the different innovative options, because there are a lot now. And I think, you know, London's a prime example of they've deployed, you know, they've got thousands and thousands of on-street charging. Yes, some of them are lampposts, but not all of them. They've got gullies and you know, charge points that go down underground and all sorts. So yeah, that's something that we are very aware of, and we're working on a paper to put together, and hoping to meet with Karine soon on that.
Yeah, and just, I mean, that might be kind of at the end of this event. That's possibly one of the things that we want to ask is, what kind of events do we want after this? And just going back to the network resilience, I think that foresight for the DNOs is very important, and that's why we're trying to get the information on what people's plans and strategies and aspirations are, because they're not fast moving. But if we actually give them that foresight and that pipeline of what's actually needed, then there's a chance there. So we've got time for one more question, which is Robin. I'll just, before we go there, there's a couple of bits in the chat about the CCR documentation that Claire can share, and there's conversations about the other bit, but I can't see any other questions there. So Robin, can I go across to you?
Yeah, Gordon, I think there is one other question. I wasn't really going to ask a question. I was just going to add
Oh,
to the question that Mark was asking. So there are two things to watch out for and perhaps look up with colleagues, Mark. So there's a document that's due to be published fairly soon from Welsh Government called Future Energy Wales, which is kind of looking at slightly longer term, but it's looking at how demand for energy and the production of energy and its transmission changes between now and 2050, and that's helping to inform the DNOs about how to provide the power and where to provide it and so on. And that's very much working alongside another piece of work that our energy team are taking forward, which is local area energy planning exercises. So some of your colleagues in other parts of the local authority are probably engaged in that. And I would just say that the work we've been doing on the preferred network, we very much see as feeding into that work. So we've recognised the issue that you're highlighting there. I think it's pretty near the top of our risk register simply because of the cost of it. But it is going to be an impediment moving forward. So the more we work together on it, the better, I think, in the short term.
Okay. We've got other questions at the end. So Nigel and Steve, can I ask you to hold those to the end, and we'll move on because I'm very aware that we're a minute over time now. So we'll pass on to Cenex and the information that they want to impart. That might actually answer some of the questions, but there will be other question sections as the agenda as we're going through. So I'll pass over to Chris and Ben from Cenex. All yours, guys.
Good morning. It's actually Ms. Chris Cox, just kicking off to start. So just to introduce myself, I'm, as I say, Chris Cox, Head of Energy Systems and Infrastructure at Cenex. So I'm part of the senior leadership team in the organisation. And really, I want to first of all just thank you for inviting us along to speak to you all today. And I guess really my role before I hand over to the team to talk you through Nevis and the other things that we can do is to try to explain a little bit about who we are and why hopefully you can trust us to help you along this journey. So Cenex is a centre of excellence for low carbon and fuel cell technologies. We've been around since 2005 and we've got three really key aspects that I just want to focus on here. So we are independent, not for profit, and we are experts in this area. As I say, we've been around since 2005, working expressly in this area, carrying out early stage research, working with local authorities and with government to understand the challenges around decarbonising transport. And so we have built up over that time a huge wealth of knowledge and experience around what works and what doesn't. And we apply this actually all over the world. So we've worked with governments in the UK, in Europe, but also all over the world, helping them understand how to tackle these challenges of what infrastructure do they need, where does it need to go, and answering those kinds of questions. We are not for profit, so we exist purely to accelerate the transition to net zero transport. We exist to help with that decarbonisation journey. And while we do have to cover our costs, we're not a charity. We aren't out to try to sell you products and services that will keep you hooked on us for ages. Instead, we are here purely to provide services at what is hopefully a very affordable rate that will really make a difference in your journey, really providing that insight and that learning that we've gained over the last 15 or so years. And we are independent, so we are not tied to any single technology or a particular approach. Therefore, when we give you advice, when we provide the insights through the different tools that we have, we work very hard not to be biased towards any particular solution or approach, but rather we try to use data and evidence to make sure that we're giving the right advice and the right information so that you can make those decisions in a truly evidence-based way. So that's a quick overview of who we are. We have within the business two core technical areas. We have the transport side, which focuses on innovations and developments of low carbon vehicles themselves. And then my area, which looks at the problem we're discussing today, which is how do you fuel or recharge those vehicles? How do you get the infrastructure in place to really make this work? And how does that then engage with the wider energy system? Interesting to have some questions around things like on-street charging and the challenges that we're seeing there. That's something which we've been doing research into over the last few years. And again, hopefully areas where we can provide clear advice and guidance, even if it's just helping you to understand what options are out there and what's available. I think that's probably all you need from me. I'm sure you're all much more interested to hear from Ben and the others as they talk through what services we can really offer. But hopefully that puts your mind at ease that we're not some massive consultancy coming in to try and take all your money, but rather we are really here to try and just support you on this journey and accelerate that transition to net zero.
Thanks, Chris. Gordon, could you switch to the next slide for me, please? So, hi, confusingly, my name is also Chris. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, my internet's playing up today, which is unusual. So hopefully this will hold. Gordon, just while I talk through this one and the next one, would you mind upgrading Ben and Lewis to presenters, please, so that they can complete their presentations? Would that be all right?
Yeah, will do.
Thank you. So today we want to we really bring to you the Nevis service for reasons that have been lost in the distant mists of time. We name all of our tool sets after mountains, and so Nevis stands for National Electric Vehicle Insights and Strategy. And very pleasingly, Ben is Scottish as well, so it's Ben's Nevis, and he's done a huge amount of work, and that's why he's going to take the lion's share of the first part of the presentation. We've actually developed this service in partnership with some of your colleagues in Monmouthshire, as they've been trying to work out their electric vehicle infrastructure strategy. And some of the comments that have come up about on-street technology, we've been working with the Vale of Glamorgan colleagues as well on sort of infrastructure advice. And so it's been a really great opportunity for us to see that there are many local authorities in England, in Wales, in Scotland, Northern Ireland and beyond, as Chris mentioned, which are asking very similar questions about what is happening, what can be done about it. And so the Nevis system and the two sort of parts that we're going to present to you today are trying to bring as best as we can reliable, independent information to your fingertips to help you make decisions. Next slide, Gordon, if you wouldn't mind. We launched it in about September, and so we've been in the kind of beta phase at the end of last calendar year, and then really rolling out very strongly based on our role with the local EV infrastructure fund that you might have heard of in England, which is a large amount of capital and resource funding available for local authorities. Over the other side of the border, we've got 4 modules that we've put forward to them. So the Insights Toolkit, which Ben will present in a moment, is looking to give that kind of quantitative view. The Knowledge Repository is qualitative and covers questions about procurement, concessions, technologies, all sorts of things. And Lewis will give an overview on that later. And we also run a bit of networking for them and events. And next slide, Gordon, if you wouldn't mind. Whilst the events themselves are very Levi focused, so England only, and we're not really talking about the networking, we do run that in consultation with the Energy Saving Trust. And so they have said that if you want to join a group of currently about 150 officers who deal with electric vehicles and electric vehicle infrastructure, it's free, and there people post questions and actually it gets answered by other colleagues who are in the mix, and we just help to curate that. So whilst that's not the focus of today, you'd also be very welcome to join that networking group if you found that to be useful. Hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of the National EV Insight and Strategy Service, Nevis service. I'm now going to pass to Ben to talk to you about the Insights Toolkit and the kind of data and modelling that we hope to give you access. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Chris, and good morning, everyone. My name is Ben Harrison, as Chris has mentioned there, and yeah, I'll talk you through a wee bit about what the Insights Toolkit is, how it can be used, and all the ins and outs of it as well. Gordon, do you mind jumping to the next slide, please? So just as a wee bit of background to start it off, what we want to understand is what does delivery of charging infrastructure mean? And it means we want to get the right number of charge points of the right type installed in the right place and under the right commercial arrangement, which is obviously not easy. And what that requires is, well, we need the capital initially to install it. We need cash flow to cover the operational cost. We need capacity from the organization. So we need you guys to be able to write the strategies, to deliver the procurement and ultimately manage contracts and manage the infrastructure. But then we also need the capability within yourselves to understand these things on the left-hand side there. So what is the right number? What are the right types and where should we be putting them? But then we also want to see some competition and compliance in the market as well. Now, the Insights Toolkit, the main purpose of this, as Chris mentioned, it is a quantitative data source effectively, and that is aimed at building capability within yourselves. So this is all about sort of bringing up that lowest sort of common denominator, the lowest bar of knowledge to say, right, so everyone can understand roughly what is it we need and roughly where do we need it and what kind of things do we need. So we're not all starting from zero. Gordon, do you mind jumping to the next slide, please? So the Insights Toolkit is broken up into 4 main parts. It's been broken up to make it as sort of user-friendly as possible and to sort of walk you through different stages in the sort of the way you might go around installing charging infrastructure or rolling out or developing a strategy. So to start with, we look at the current status. So this is looking at where are you just now? So what numbers of vehicles have you got in the regions? How many of them are electric vehicles? What's the sort of numbers of charge points we've got? And then even looking at where are we with emissions? So what's the emissions from transport currently? And even looking at maybe whereabout are the adopters. We then go on to look at future projections. So this is really probably the main bit and the main focus of the toolkit. And this is saying, what is the likely uptake of electric vehicles across the country? And all this information it is broken down to a sort of local authority level, and I'll show that in a second as well. But looking at what is the numbers of electric vehicles that there's likely to be in the future in each region, and then based on that number of electric vehicles, how many charge points might we need and of what type would we need in the region to support the charging demand from those vehicles. We then go on to consider the potential benefits. So what are the changes in CO2 emissions? So what's the reductions by transitioning to electric vehicles? What are the air quality improvements? So that's the local benefits from reductions in NOx emissions and particulate matter emissions. And then what are the mitigated damage costs? So that's the socialized benefit, monetary benefit from reducing emissions. And then finally, we obviously want to know what it's all going to cost. So we look a wee bit at what's the outline business case. So what are the sort of capital costs, revenue, operational sort of costs that might be associated with it as well. Do you mind jumping to the next slide, Gordon? I think, yeah. So what I'm going to do, rather than just talk about it, I'm going to show you. So I'm going to share my screen just now and jump straight into the toolkit if I can. Let's find out if I can get this working. There we go. Is everyone able to see my screen just now?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So what we're seeing just now is the Nevis service sort of homepage, as you like. And I'll jump straight into the Insights Toolkit. So Lewis will cover the second section of this later. So this here is our Insights Toolkit landing page, and we've got the 4 different sections broken down at the start. And we've also got a bit of information on here about the background of the toolkit, basically everything I'm telling you just now, and a slightly outdated video, but I'm going to be updating that as well. And then we've also got quite a detailed methodology in here as well, and I can talk you through all that if anyone's interested in it, how anything's been figured out, probably in the questions or at the end of this call. So I'm going to jump into the current status section just now. And as I mentioned, this is looking at where we're at just now. And I'm going to stick it on Wales just now. So I've got access to all the regions. That's why there's quite a few here. So I'm going to just pop it on Monmouthshire because we've been doing some work with them on this just now. So as you can see, we've got access to all the different local authorities in Wales. And what we're looking at just now is what's the vehicle park in Wales or in Monmouthshire looking like from 2015 up to 2021. Something to mention here is that we are regularly updating this. So right now we've got 2021 data, as that is the most recent data we've got access to. In the next couple of months, we should hopefully get some data for 2022, and then that will be added in as well. So we'll be looking at sort of quarterly updates for this service. Then we also, in each of these pages I'm going to go through, the layout is going to be relatively the same, it's just different information that's on each page. And one thing to point out just now is that each of these pages has these filters down the left-hand side here. So for instance, if you wanted to look specifically at cars, you can remove the light goods vehicles filter there, and we can look at what's the breakdown of the vehicle park in Monmouthshire and the car park in Monmouthshire by fuel type and specific years. So this just gives you that first glimpse at where you're at. So as I mentioned before as well, we're looking at the vehicle parks, the types of cars and vans there are, and the emissions. So here we've got, I'm looking at CO2 emissions for cars in Monmouthshire from 2015 to 2021. We do have this funny wee drop here, but that's due to COVID, so less travel, less emissions. And then down here at the bottom, you can change between the different types of emissions you've got as well. So you might want to look at what are the CO2e scope 3 emissions, so that's transmission and distribution losses and the emissions embodied there. We've got NOx emissions, particulate matter emissions, both from the tailpipe of the car and also from the road tyre and brake wear as well. Finally, we have a wee bit in here looking at the numbers of types of charge points that are currently installed in the regions. This data is all pulled from the National Charge Point Registry, and if you've used it, you'll know that it doesn't include every single charge point. But what we can say is that these have all been validated, and that this can be looked at as a minimum number of charge points in the region on the given year. So that's more or less the current status. So that would just be for baselining where you're at and to build a strategy from. Up here on the top, we can jump between the different sections. So I'm going to jump into future projections now to give you a bit of an idea of what's included in here. Pull that up there. So what we have here is, again, we're looking at the vehicle park, but we're looking at how this might change over the next, maybe say 30, 40 years, up to about 2050. Now, obviously, with projections, they're always going to be wrong, and the further away from now, the higher the degree of uncertainty is going to be. So these should be looked at as what might happen to the vehicle park. But as I said as well, we're going to be updating these regularly. So every quarter, we'll be updating these with new information and developing and refining our methodologies. So we will be improving the projections as we go. So it's not just a set point in time, and that's what it's going to be. These will be updated regularly to make them as realistic and useful as possible. So on the projections, one of the main sort of overarching pieces of modeling in this toolkit is our EV uptake curve projections. Now, as I said, that there's variation. There's going to be whatever happens in reality is going to be different to what we show here. So what we've done is we've created 3 different projections. We've got a high, a medium, and a low uptake projection. So the medium uptake projection is based on the zero emission vehicle mandate. So that's a ban on the sale of petrol and diesel cars and vans by 2030. The high uptake scenario said, well, what if we're going to be more ambitious? What if we were to ban the sale of them earlier? So this is saying, what if we ban them by 2027? And you can see that there's a slight change in the curves. Now, it doesn't look massive there, but when you're considering that these are we're looking at 30, 40 million vehicles here, that's quite a big difference. And then the low uptake scenario there is what if we backtracked and we looked at, say, we move back to the road to zero strategy. So that's where 70% of the sale of new cars and vans to be electric, zero emission by 2030. So you can move between these uptake projections to see what's the sort of the range we might be looking at of the types of vehicles in the region. We can also focus the data as well, because quite often you're not going to want to look all the way up to 2050. So we can look at, right, what if it's just between now and 2030, and what might be the number of vehicles? And then you can focus in on the specific areas, and you can pull these numbers out. So by 2020 and 28, we might be looking at these vehicles here. Currently, we're on the UK, but as I said, yeah, you can just change these filters, and you can look at the specific regions you might want to. I'll just stick it on Wales for now. So once we've looked at the numbers and types of vehicles that are going to be on the road, we can also look at the charging infrastructure requirement for that as well. And in here, we're well aware that the type of charging infrastructure that is required will vary by location to location, because no two places are exactly the same. There's similarities, and there will be similar solutions, but one area might be more suited to more like ultra rapid charging hubs, and less of the on-street charging infrastructure like we were mentioning. There's some difficulties around there. So what we've built in is the option to flip between different EV infrastructure strategies. So we've got 3 here as well. So the first one, if I look at, is this residential one. So this is saying, what if we want to really build the vast majority of the charging infrastructure we're looking for is residential. So this is slower charging on residential streets, likely on street or maybe in car parks near to where residents live. And most of the charging is going to be done there overnight. And then you can look at the sort of numbers and types of charge points you'll require. So maybe by 2030, we'll need around about 30,000 standard charge points in there. So that'll be around about your 7 kilowatt chargers there. But then what if this other region wanted a more ultra rapid charging hub focused approach? Then we can flick onto that and we can see how those numbers change and how they're brought down, or almost the number of standard charge points might half. And then if we're looking at something in the middle, which quite often is probably the route we'll be looking at, is we can have a look at the numbers there, and we can see roughly what is the sort of the number of charge points that might be required. Now the idea here is to give you an idea of roughly what are the numbers we need and what are the types of charge points we need. Not to say that this is absolutely the number you're aiming for and this isn't exactly the number you want, but it's in the ballpark, so that when you're going out to procurement, you can say, actually, you know what, in the next 10 years, we're going to be needing maybe up to 20,000 charge points. So actually, when we're going out to procurement, we might be looking at that sort of scale of magnitude rather than looking at, right, we'll get a couple hundred charge points here and a couple of hundred charge points there. So that's more or less everything that's included in the future projection section there. In each of these tabs as well, we've also got the data in a table form as well, just to make it easier to pull out specific bits of information. You can also export all the information that's in these tables and these charts just by clicking on this wee button here, and you can export the data straight to Excel. So you can pull that out and you can use it however you want. We just ask that it's all referenced so that we can work on the version control and make sure that everything's up to date as possible. So that's future projections. Moving forward, I'll jump into the potential benefits. So this, as I mentioned before, is looking at emissions, mitigated damages, and the lights there. So here we have sort of the projected reduction in emissions from transitioning to electric vehicles. And as you can see, we've still got that big dip there in around 2020, 2021, where we had COVID and how the numbers the emissions all dropped. But this chart here is showing that as we transition to electric vehicles, emissions are going to drop. But if we change the uptake projection, we can see how those emissions vary slightly. So if we've got slower transition to electric vehicle, obviously we're going to have a slower reduction in emissions. And if we have a quicker uptake, then there's going to be a quicker reduction as well. And again, we've got the same filters you can all flick through there to use this within your strategies to sort of add a benefit to the spend that you're going to have to be putting against electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Finally, the mitigated damages as a benefit. So this is looking at, again, the monetized benefit of reducing emissions. And this is effectively saying, if we don't, if we weren't to reduce our emissions, or weren't to make this change against this baseline, what's the monetized, what would it be costing to to society if we didn't do it, and measuring between the different, so effectively a cumulative monetary benefit across the years. And again, this can be used within your developing your strategy as well to sort of say why it is important that we transition to electric vehicles and why we spend this money on charging infrastructure. The final section, and I'll sort of jump through this quite quickly here, is looking at the implementation planning. And as I said before, this is all about costs. So we're saying, what's the capital cost? What's it going to cost us to install these charge points? And then what's the operational cost and the revenue as well? One final filter that we've got added in here that you can flick between to, again, give you that slight bit more granularity, is looking at the different commercial arrangements. Now, these are all explained quite a bit more in the knowledge repository that Lewis will touch on later, and they've been picked up on this call already, is what are the different commercial arrangements, how do we go through procurement and all these things as well. So there's a bit of that in the knowledge repository. But what we have these here for just now is to say, what is the difference in terms of capital costs, operating costs, and the amount of revenue that you might retain by going down a different commercial arrangement? So for instance, right now it's on own and operate. So that's effectively saying we're going to do it all ourselves, and we're going to retain all the revenue. So this is basically your maximum. You're going to have 100% of the capital costs, 100% of the revenue, and 100% of the operating costs there as well. But then if you were to go down something like a concession approach where you're not taking on the operational costs, but you're going to have some of the capital costs in there, and you're going to take a little bit of the revenue, how does that look in terms of the costs? Now, what we would say is these are very much just examples. When you go out to procurement and when you agree your commercial arrangement, they're 100% going to be different to what we're showing here. These are just to be used as an example to understand what could happen if you went down a different route, and to give you an idea of what the rough sort of costs might be to install the charging infrastructure. And again, you can export all this data, you can look at it yourself and use it however you want. So that is a whistle-stop tour of the Insights Toolkit. I think I'll probably pass back to actually, is any questions just now, or I'll pass back to
I was going to say, Ben, you keep your screen on for the time being. We'll run through the questions. If there are any questions, please raise your hand. But Nigel, was your question relative to the last section, and therefore I just want to look back to you first.
Yeah, thank you for that. It was more to do with on-street charging and options, and the contact I've had with Oxford to sign up to perhaps a small e-gully trial. So if anybody's interested in that, we can share data with that. But anyway, that was my point.
Lovely. Okay, cheers, Nigel. And then onto the chat bar. Ross and Gemma have raised a couple of points. Ross, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, it was just around numbers of EVs per local authority area, really. This is something I've sort of struggled with over the past 10 years of looking at it. It's just that the comment that the DVLA figures are about registered vehicles, registered keepers. And so if you've got like a leasing company in one local authority area, that can look like the best, local authority in the country, whereas actually there's only 3 people that own. So I just wondered if you've taken that into account or corrected for it at all.
So that is something we're actively looking into, and it's something we're well aware of. And there are specific places that it is, clearly obvious that they are not that number of vehicles not registered there. We have spoken to the leasing organisations who have got the large numbers of vehicles in these areas, and we haven't been able to find from them where they are actually registered. But this is, as I was saying, these numbers we're continually building on. We're trying to improve these as much as possible and make them as relevant as possible. So every quarter we will be doing quite big updates, and it is something we're chasing down. So you're absolutely right. Yeah, they're looking at the specific number of electric vehicles in the regions isn't perfect just now. What I'd say is that as we move forward, then obviously as the numbers of vehicles on the road scale, then these issues become less prevalent. So I would say that it's less impactful on the sort of the uptake projections going forward, because what it is these are all based on a UK-wide uptake projection, rather than the specific ones, to sort of avoid those specific sort of issues where you've got these massive spikes in numbers in one area and lower ones in another area. So that's what we've looked at just now. So yeah, it's not perfect. We don't have the exact answer to that just now, but it is something we're looking into.
Will the large leasing companies maybe give you totals per area? They're probably commercial information they wouldn't share, I suppose.
So I'll just jump in here, Ross. I've had long conversations with the BVRLA, the British Van Rental and Leasing Association. We've had conversations directly with the likes of Lex, Europe Car and others. Basically, the BVRLA doesn't have that information as the industry body, because whilst we know the registered location, then, like you say, it's commercially sensitive as to where those vehicles are put out. And actually, it's 2 or 3 sort of degrees of freedom away, because it goes from, Europe Car to a company, and then that company to an employee that might be somewhere else. We've had a bit of a conversation then trying to get down into the next level to see whether they can share that. And as Ben referenced, we're looking at other data sources, including whether, say, MOT data or other kind of road information data could give a sense as to what vehicles are where and allow us to account for this. Furthermore, talking to your Scottish colleagues, there is a project going on to see whether the DFT figures that are presented here can be corrected somehow for this factor and how to do that well. So we're engaged with that and trying to see if that can assist. So as best practice improves, we'll look to try and address it.
Thank you. It's just
Okay.
a flag to local authority colleagues as well. I've seen articles in the press before saying, oh, Monmouthshire's fantastic in terms of EV uptake and, you know, ex-local authorities awful. And it's probably just the difference between people who've bought their vehicles outright and those who lease. So it's just a flag to everyone on the data, really. Thank you.
Okay, cheers, Ross. Gemma, does that answer your question as well in the chat?
Yeah, I think it does. So yeah, my question was around if it's able to identify visitors rather than just like resident data. So it sounds like maybe that's not included at the moment. But I guess the question, is that on your horizon as well to consider adding that in?
So yeah, you're right. It is just based on residents. Yeah, I think we're open to everything, to be honest, at the moment, and we're building a pipeline of improvements we're going to make to it. So we're always open to hear from yourselves what would be most useful, and what information is useful to have in there. But yeah, so right now we don't have the visitor data, and the visitor data that we have looked at, there isn't a lot of it, especially broken down by the vehicle types that we would need. So it's something we consider in the future. Don't have it directly on our horizon just now, but if it is something that'd be really useful, it's something we can start to look at and including in this analysis.
All right, lovely. And you did have your hand up until about a minute ago. Do you want to raise a question or?
Yes, if I can, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Sorry, my hand's still showing, so I apologise.
Okay, sorry, it's got off on this with some reason.
Okay, obviously, it's very interesting, the projections you've provided, and the costs associated with the numbers are extraordinary. I wondered whether or not you've built into this prediction engine the overall aim or an objective of the Welsh Transport Strategy is to modal shift. And we would like to get people out of cars rather than accelerate their interest in cars. And I wondered whether you've included this into that projection.
So it's not included in this projection, but that is very much on our sort of next agenda item, is to look at, right, what if we were to change? So you know how we've got all these filters that say, right, what if we've got a high uptake, low uptake, medium uptake? We're wanting to build something in there where we can say, what if, yeah, we reduce car ownership by, say, 20%? What if we were to reduce the driven miles by 10%? What might happen to the requirement for charging infrastructure? Because ultimately, what's probably going to happen is the number of charge points is going to drop by about 10% because the energy requirement is going to drop by 10%. So that is something we'd like to build into it, build it in as a sort of a feature there. Not in it just now, but again, one of these things that we're looking to develop into that in the future.
Because I mean, if you invested that amount of money in public transport, what would that effect be?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. It's a massive amount of money, and yeah, this is very much focused on charging infrastructure, and it's not touched on the sort of the area of like public transport as well. But it's something we're very well aware of and something we do promote as well. Saying if everyone just switches to electric vehicles, it's not the right option. What we want to do is encourage public transport, active travel where possible. But if we do transition to electric vehicles, what is the demand going to be? And as you can see as well, we're looking at these projections up to sort of 2050 just now, and chances are that these reductions in mileages and vehicle ownership numbers are going to come downstream a wee bit. So what we're trying to say here is that these are the sort of the scale, the magnitude of the challenge ahead of us, the numbers that we're looking to hit. And once we start moving forward, then yes, it's 100% something we want to build in, is that ability to look at that next level down and say, okay, let's start. What if we can reduce car ownership? How, and from my point of view, a big part of that would be looking at the emissions, the change in emissions. Obviously, you could see when you jump between the low, medium, and the high uptake that the change in emissions wasn't massive. But if you do that in terms of getting people out of cars and reducing mileage, that emissions is going to drop quite considerably quicker, I imagine. So it is something that we're very keen on and will want to sort of build into this in the future.
Yeah, it's also about how we use our power sources more economically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Ben, is it fair just to add that at the moment we use the Society for Motor Manufacturers and Traders vehicle park estimations, which do start to take into account some reduction in the future in mileage and in vehicle use. But Anne, as you mentioned, you sort of put the engine behind this can easily adapt if we want to build more Welsh specific sort of vehicle park projections in and apply that to your areas, then that's very easy for us to do, and we'd be quite happy to make that happen. perhaps in agreement with Steve and Gordon and Kareem.
All right, cheers, Chris. I know we're running over a little bit, but we've got a little bit of bunts in time for questions at the end. So if I pick up on the two questions, Nigel, you've got your hand up next.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was to say really how useful this toolkit would be to reinforce existing strategies. Our strategy that's just about going through heads of service final review now, it's just about to come out. We've got static snapshots of low, medium, high uptake and forecast projections, but having access to a dynamic tool with the cost scenarios, the ownership scenarios dynamically changing, and it is going to be incredibly useful. So it's just to reinforce how useful this tool will be to us.
All right, lovely. Cheers, Nigel. And Dylan, the last question then, and then we'll move over to Rachel.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, it's really a question about the strategy really going forward, as the projection for the demand for the infrastructure increases over time. Is it seen as the responsibility of Welsh government or via local authorities to provide the infrastructure going forward, or how does the private sector feed into this? And are they included in those projections as well, and the existing infrastructure that's in place? Because I think as Anne alluded to, the cost of providing that infrastructure in the future is going to be enormous, isn't it? And is it therefore going to be seen as a publicly owned, nationalised asset going forward, where the public sector would be sort of pushed aside to some degree, and so it's completely nationally owned? Is that the strategy going forward for Welsh government or even UK governments?
Ben, do you want to pick up that very quickly, and then I'll pass over to Steve and Kareem, because I think it's possibly this is the tool that actually feeds into that rather than will give you the answer to that question, Dylan.
So ultimately, this gives you the projected requirement for public charging infrastructure. So that is the total charging infrastructure requirement. Where that comes from will vary from place to place. We're trying to give the tools and the information that would sit behind a strategy, and whatever that strategy is will likely vary from place to place, depending on what is the best option for the area, who's the staff resource, and that is maybe the risk appetite of the specific local authorities. So what we're doing is saying this is all the information that would then be used to develop a strategy, and what sits in that strategy will vary. So I'd say that's what this is a total demand, and it does vary from region to region based on things like the requirement, the availability of on-street parking. So the numbers do account for some sort of rurality in there as well. So yeah, it does vary from place to place, but yeah, it won't tell you what the actual solution is. That is still got to be developed from the strategy. So I think, Gordon, that's probably you to pick up from there, maybe.
Or Kareem.
Yes, so thank you, Dylan, for that question. So it is, I mentioned in the introduction that we worked on how we're going to deliver the strategy and came up with 5 key priorities, and I think it will be worth us really taking the time to discuss those with you, explain and see how together we can work on this. But what I was going to just a very simple statement, I guess, is it is recognized that the majority of the infrastructure has to be delivered by the private sector. So there are obviously some targeted aspect of types of charging or location where you as a local authority might be best placed to deliver, and some others where I think Steve started mentioning it when we looked at the preferred network, where there will be what we've been calling the market failure element, or locations where potentially we as TFW, Welsh Government, might want or need to invest directly. But the majority of the infrastructure, we see it as being developed by the private sector. So the key, for me, effort now and focus that we need to work on is that engagement with the private sector, and find how we can leverage what types of support incentive we can put together to leverage the private sector engagement. So this is really the focus, and I'm going to pass it on to Steve because he's done much more work than me directly working with the private sector.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure how much more I can add to what's been said already. I agree with all of it. And yeah, just to highlight, obviously, we've had quite a good chunk of engagement with the private sector to date. We had a workshop in Wrexham in November, which we had good representation on, and we've continued those one-to-one conversations, which are giving us some really useful starting points, I think, for that task and finish group that we talked about in terms of how we, facilitate that majority commercially led delivery.
And just whilst I cannot obviously speak for UK government, we do spend an awful lot of time talking to the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles and Department for Transport. And just to echo what Karine said, the strategy UK-wide, I think, is to increase the commerciality of deployment. So not to put all the burden on local authorities in terms of having to fund this 100%, but to leverage as much public investment into the sector as possible, and then to target what public funding is available on those areas where perhaps the private commercial case doesn't quite stack up just yet.
All right, there's a couple of questions in the chat, but Claire, Nigel, can we come back to those afterwards just to move on, if that's okay? And I'll pass over to Rachel for an update on the current rollout. Rachel?
Thanks, Gordon. Yeah, so I just want to quickly give you an update on a project that we've been rolling out. So back in October 2020, we started working on a rapid charge point delivery across Wales. So it was quite evident that Wales had quite a poor provision of rapid charge points, particularly in mid Wales, and it was very difficult to drive north to south or east to west in Wales currently. There's less than 5% of charge points that are installed in Wales. I think it's 4.1% at the moment, but that has increased and it continues to increase. But I think we recognise that charge point operators weren't coming and delivering in Wales, and a lot of that was down to the cost of the infrastructure, particularly where you're putting in rapids and ultra rapids. So we decided to deliver this project, and the idea of the project was to ensure that there was a rapid charge point every 25 miles in Wales. And hopefully by the time we've finished delivering these sites, then that will be the case. And there's more private sector charge points that have popped up since we've started this project. So the idea of this is to ensure that people feel confident in driving an EV in Wales. I drive an EV, and when I started this project, I couldn't drive in Wales to get up to North Wales. I had to go into England and then across and charge. So that's the idea behind it, is that people don't have infrastructure anxiety, that they're confident that if they buy an EV, they'll be able to charge it. The other part of the project is that this supports local economies. So this has been working with the local authorities, excuse me, where we are putting rapid charge points, usually 2, in a local authority car park in towns and villages. So the idea behind that is that people will get out of their car and they'll go and spend in those towns and villages. And some of these are also tourist places. And we've seen over the Easter holidays a huge increase in usage, which shows that people are using these when they're coming to visit these towns. Can you just move on to the next one, Gordon? So we started off with 12 sites originally with the project, and we've actually managed to increase that to 19 sites. So those little dots, which you might not be able to see, show where we're delivering those sites. So we've got 6 sites which are built and operational. And like I say, you can see over the summer holidays, they were very busy, and the Easter holidays, we've had a huge increase, which is really good to see. And there's some really good feedback on ZapMap on some of these sites. So 6 of the sites are built, so that's 10 charge points. There's another 5 that are built, but we're just waiting for the power connections. And I think that's a point that a lot of these sites, we've ensured that they're future proofed. So we haven't just put in enough power to deliver what we've delivered. We've actually put in extra power so that if these sites become extremely busy, then local authorities and the charge point operator can put in more sites relatively cheaply and easily, because there's extra power there. We've got 2 sites that are in the programme to be built, so they should have power by May. So hopefully those sites will be all up and running before the summer. And then we've got a few stragglers that have got a few issues, where there's leases still outstanding. There's a planning application in Brecon National Park, and a couple that have got some sticky way leaves that we're working on. So I think it's been a very big learning curve for Transport for Wales. So I have worked in the EV industry slightly longer than my role within Transport for Wales, but I think this project has helped us to understand how difficult it is to deliver. So that's the three main things we found were getting legal agreements signed. So this model is the charge point operator has got a lease directly with the local authority, and I think it's something new. So that's slowed down the process and a number of these sites getting those legal agreements signed. Once they are signed, then the charge point operator can build these sites and get power to them relatively quickly. The other side of it has been the grid upgrade work. So like I said, we've future-proofed a lot of these sites, and we managed to get some green recovery funding so that 8 of the sites in Scottish Power's area have got substations built, so 500 kVA substations, which leaves itself open to local authorities being able to put in some fast charging, or charge point operator developing the site in the future. So that's been really good. But what it does mean is that you have to build a substation and get leases and wayleaves and connect that to the grid. So that's slightly slowed down the process. And then I think we've spoken about this, or Dylan mentioned it earlier, was the procurement process. So that was quite lengthy. And again, we learned a lot from that, and we have got a number of different documents now that would facilitate another procurement exercise. But there are frameworks out there. They can be used, but I think when you're going out and not direct awarding and doing a competition, then there's an awful lot of work that goes into the background of getting that procurement process out there to get a charge point operator on board. So yeah, I think that those have been the largest lessons that we've learnt. Can you just move on to the next slide, Gordon? So then the next exercise, we're asked by Welsh Government to help and support CADU. So CADU are changing their fleet to fully electrical vehicles. So they've got vans, they've got masoners and other trades that go out and work across Wales, and they needed some fast charging installing in their depots. So we originally started working with them to support them to deliver that, and we decided as part of that we should probably look at some of the public charging, so some of the castles and other monuments across Wales. So we've got a project that we're delivering, and I'm supporting CADU on, which is to deliver, I think, is 4 depots and 14 sites, and that's putting fast charging in for customers. So when they're coming to visit these sites, that they've got the ability to charge whilst they're there. And some of the things that we've helped CADU, you can see on there. So we sort of did a project analysis of understanding what type of charging should be there, what's already around in the area, made DNO applications, liaise with the DNO on sites. Obviously, these are not straightforward sites. They're scheduled monuments, so there's a lot of consents, and have to be a little bit careful where we put the charge points, just so it's in keeping with these buildings and monuments. We've also helped them with some budgeting and forecasting for spend. We helped them with a procurement exercise, so we helped them put all the documents together, gave them some technical support, and helped to evaluate the bids when they came in. And then I'm helping them project manage the charge point operator that's been brought in to deliver this, and just helping on ad hoc advice. And yeah, but that's something that we can continue to support ULEV projects across Wales, and we've got a lot of learning and understanding from delivering what we're delivering currently at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Cheers, Rachel. Is this Lewis? Are you?
Yeah.
Coming in here, so I'll pass over to Lewis quickly. There are a couple of questions in chat, but if you don't mind, I'll hold those to the end. Some of them are actually being answered as we're going through, but Lewis, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. So yeah, I'm Lewis. I work under Chris at Cenex, and work with Ben, and I'm going to present to you the knowledge repository now. I'm also Welsh, from Wales, so Croeso Cenex, and I'm first language, but for the purpose of this, I'll stay in English. Yeah, so introducing the knowledge repository, I'll demonstrate later where it is on the online portal. But the knowledge repository is basically a resource of articles, guidance, and videos for yourselves as local authorities, which is designed to help and support you through all EVI processes, and upskill yourselves towards whatever you're working towards, whether that's developing your strategy or you're just starting out and looking at how to kick off the process. And there's also lots of information there whereby you can be signposted towards further information, be that building regulations or, as we spoke about, procurement. If we go to the next slide, please, Gordon. Yeah, so as you'll see in the demonstration slightly later on, this is the steps that are identified. And when you log into the portal, this is what you see, and you can then click through the access to have a look at every aspect of this journey for yourselves. Yes, next slide, please. Yep, so as Chris mentioned earlier, roadshows, so these have been going around the country talking about specific items on EVI infrastructure. This is with the Levi Sport Body, which is us and other companies going around, and for example, the next one is going to be on procurement. Handy. So yeah, so as has been touched upon in this call already, looking at procurement contracts and how to procure EVI, whether regarding lease or however approach you're wishing to take. This is what's been developed in the knowledge policy, which Chris and other colleagues done quite a lot of work on. So yeah, and it's just looking at trying to guide you in terms of heads of terms, what to look for in this, and how to arrange commercial arrangements. For example, this one looks at a concession type contract. And okay, so now I'm going to share my screen if that's all right, and do the demonstration.
Just while that goes on, whereas with the data, you get access to your relevant local data. So I know Ben had to click through the different lists to select Wales or select whatever. It'll be automatically matched. In the case of the knowledge repository, everything's available to everybody. So you should be able to go in and have a good look.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So can everyone see my screen now?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, great. All right. So as Ben said, this is the interface for the Nevis platform, and where Ben went on the Insight Toolkit, I'm going to show you the knowledge repository. So as was demonstrated on the slide, so you can see the steps through all the process here, whether depending on whatever stage you are at in your EVI strategy. So for example, if we did quickly click on just starting out, sort of gives you key guidance into EVs itself, EV charging, EV tips, really covering the basics of charge point power types and smart charging, different acronyms, because as you're probably well aware, this industry is full of acronyms. Then if we go back, and so say we go to developing your strategy, and this is where we've done a lot of work with Monmouthshire, as previously mentioned. So yeah, so key articles here are looking at EVI strategy. So if we click into here, just gives you a sort of whistle-stop tour of what you're looking at into producing your strategy, what you need to set out, how to define it. Yeah, and really looking at basically as a local authority how you're going to develop this process, as can be seen, and it runs through different scenarios, stages, different types of charging, when, how, and then so yeah, if I go back again. So there's also different items in here. So looking at DNO tools, EV charging, and then for example, there's also, because it's a body of knowledge, the knowledge repository, there's also different articles on, for example, lamppost charging, pavement channels, which has already been mentioned in this call as gullies. Yeah, and then I thought just through, so, and also building regulations, if you're required to look at, that's regarding car parking, and I know car parks have already been mentioned in here. So as procurement was mentioned in here, I'm just going to go into this as well. So yeah, so I know commercial arrangements and heads of terms have been mentioned previously on this call. So yeah, this is step 5 of the process. So were you looking for any knowledge or guidance on this that we've previously done, or anything that Cenex do in this field being published on here, you can then explore this article, for example, commercial arrangements, which will introduce and look at approaches and compare for yourself, so own and operate your venture. And I appreciate land leasing has also been mentioned on this call. Again, in the same context, looking at heads of terms, which was touched upon on the previous slide. So yeah, which I know Chris has been doing quite a lot of work on. So yeah, the aim of the knowledge repository is to provide this qualitative guidance, very different from the Insight Toolkit, which is very quantitative and data focused. This is designed to be somewhere where you as a local authority can look into and go into to better inform yourselves of how to approach these processes. So yeah, and you can just click through and look at what you require from here and from us. And also if there isn't something in here, for example, the building regs, I know that takes you to the PDF of the building regulations, so it will also signpost you to where there may be further information on that. I think in terms of a demonstration for the knowledge repository, that's it from me.
Happy to take questions.
Yes, thank you.
I guess just while people are thinking, Gordon, it's currently in English, so whilst, as Lewis mentioned, he is Welsh, we've obviously developed this particularly in English, but there was an open question about whether it would be helpful to have it in Welsh or not. But also we can answer any questions you might have about the kind of coverage, and again with the repository, as Lewis mentioned, it's kind of growing body, so each month we're adding new articles, and you certainly make requests and we can do our best, and where there are already existing great articles, we're linking out to those, so we're not trying to reinvent the wheel where there is a good document or a good resource available.
Yeah, and I've just put into the chat, just if you can use the react buttons. One of the aspects of today is to actually ask whether both this knowledge repository and ditto for the Insights Toolkit are actually something that you feel would actually be a benefit to do. So if just above the screen, if you move the mouse over the screen, there should be a react button. There's a thumbs up or a shocked face. Well, so we'll just go for 50-50 almost, yes, no, if there isn't anything, or if there are other elements that you need in there. That way at least we have some kind of feedback to allow Karine to go back to the minister and say, look, out of 56 people, senior people within the local authorities, there was this many actually said this will be a useful addition to what their jobs and the rollout is. And then what I'll do is, well, once we've finished that, probably towards the end, I'll ask the same kind of question again. So if you just go into the chat bar, that'll be great. I'll move forward then. Are there any questions just generally on everything else while that is kind of moving on? And I don't know whether the bings are kind of coming through on the microphone or not, but are there any questions out there? And I'll mute my microphone for a second.
Yeah, Marco in Pembrokeshire. Go back to Lewis there. It looks really good, that good toolkit. You talk about building regs, but there are obviously things like streetways regulations as well you need to consider about installation of operators in the ground and installation of. Didn't see that in there. I know we just had a whistle stop tour, but we've got to consider how we how this operators, whether it's private operators, actually installed in the carriageway for the on-street stuff anyway. So just might need to bolster that and signpost people towards streetways legislation as well. So Rob, building regs.
Cheers, Mark. Blair, has your question been answered with regards to what you raised earlier in the side chat?
Sorry,
you were talking to me.
Yes, sorry, Claire. Yeah.
Yeah, there were a couple of questions. One, I'm really interested in the model for the preparing of the regional transport plan. I just wanted to make sure that it aligned with the base data, because that's what we've used for our energy strategy. So, and we've broken all of our modes down in terms of emissions. So, you know, for road transport, bus, rail, car, you know, all different modes. So I want to make sure that if we do use this model, that, you know, it is going to align with our existing data sets, which it appears it is. In terms of the CCR, we've already got a strategy prepared by Cenex, and it was updated in 2021. So I don't think the strategy element is the issue. I think is when the local authorities identify where to put the infrastructure, because at the moment by the end of May we will have probably delivered about 800 charging points across the region in the last 2 years. But I think we've done the easy stuff. So it's like, you know, we're going to come to the more difficult stuff now because we've done all the easy stuff. So it's identifying where else. But I think we're going to need to look at the data from the usage data to warrant further infrastructure, you know, and see how well it's being used first. But we have been looking at schools and health facilities, for example, but the costs far exceed any money that funding opportunities come through. You know, it's not a case of what the OZEV is offering. You know, you can multiply that by at least 10 for the real costs. And even in the Cenex strategy costs for our own, the reality is far more expensive, and the national grid costs vary astronomically from like 2 grand to 100 grand so per site. So you know, all those things need to be taken into consideration, I think.
Yeah, and Steve, is that something was there, trying to paraphrase the question there, Claire, was that just a statement of where we're at the time being, or where we feel we're at?
I just, well, there's a couple of questions really, you know, where do we go from here, you know, once we've done the easy stuff, which obviously, you know, the tool would benefit us in that respect. So is how we utilize that tool. You know, what do we do with workplace parking when the costs far exceed any funding that's on the table? And yeah, how useful is it going to be with our RTPs, and how easy is it going to be to access that data in order to prepare our regional transport plans, I suppose.
Okay.
And our local area energy plans.
Steve, do you want to pick up on those? I mean, workplace parking certainly is one of them, isn't it?
Yeah, it's something that we'd obviously looked at before. I mean, our focus at the moment has obviously been on, you know, what can we do to accelerate commercial development, and that sort of, in a way, lends itself more easily, I think, to the publicly available infrastructure. I would hope that in time that will actually create benefits in terms of being able to plan better workplace charging, and obviously for, you know, large fleet owners and large workplaces, that is very significant. So it's not something that we're kind of looking at immediately, but I think, you know, in terms of the where do we go from here, I suppose in a way we don't have a sort of 10-year plan planned out, because there is so much change in the market that anytime you write a strategy, I guarantee in 2 years' time it won't be fit for purpose. And it's what we've learned is that we just have to keep revising and retracking. So I think, you know, for us, the immediate priorities are getting that commercial sector engagement working with the public sector, getting clarity for the public sector in terms of the tools that are available from, and I think it's a case of then recalibrate where you are from there, rather than trying to plan 10 years ahead, which I think at the moment is just too difficult.
Yeah, but on that, you know, in terms of, like, we tested the market, as you know, significantly in terms of you know, what the commercial sector were willing to pick up. And I think in the CCR, because we have put in quite a significant amount of infrastructure now, I think in a year or so's time, you know, we might be in a space where the commercial sector might be more favourable to pick up some of this. But I think for regions that are just starting out, I don't think they've got a hope in hell of getting the commercial sector to invest, you know, straight away, because we had a lot of issues when we market tested, but also when we procured. And even as far as going to borrow money from the Wales Development Bank, the contractors struggled because they said it was too risky. So you know, I don't think we're anywhere near where the commercial sector would be willing to fund totally at the moment. But I think in the CCR specifically, because we've put so much infrastructure in, I think it's sown the seeds, and it's got the commercial sector more interested.
Yeah, I agree. I understand what you're saying. I mean, in terms of, you're right, it's both the two things that geographically, there are areas of Wales where there is no commercial delivery, and to expect it all to be picked up the commercial sector at the moment is very, very unrealistic. But the idea is, you know, that rising tide eventually floats all boats, and it's almost like a matter of when rather than if. And it's finding, you know, it's also keeping abreast of it, because, as I say, in a year's time, things look different to what they do now. In a way, they have been very different from a year ago.
Yeah, and I noticed Ross's comments about concession lengths, but obviously local authorities are quite risk averse, and you know, when we looked into this in detail when we started, you know, concession lengths, you know, the local authorities weren't prepared to take that risk for that length of time at the time. So, and I'm not convinced that that'll change anyway anytime soon, because there's still a bit skeptical about the technology and whether, you know, the technology will change significantly, that we could end up with a load of abandoned infrastructure. So now I know, you know, Cenex has constantly told us that's not going to be the case for a long time. And it, you know, likelihood is it won't, but, you know, I think there's still some skepticism out there about that. For local authorities to be confident to give, you know, significantly longer concessions. Like ours is 5 with the option to extend to 10, but you know, the contractors are asking for 10 to 20, you know, to make them invest, which is, you know, a big commitment in local authority terms.
But one of the things, just on circling back round to what you were saying, was some of the lessons learned and the knowledge that you've got, Claire. That's what we're trying to share around, so we can actually come about these things. We have had a discussion with a charge point provider in the last 2 weeks who were going to the Development Bank of Wales, and we were like very interested to see how well they were received. Do you know, it's like kind of, it is like kind of a moving, like kind of goal at the time being. But if we can find out that the Development Bank of Wales are less adverse to that now, then that's the kind of information we want to share around to the whole group and make sure that people are aware that things are changing. Do you know, there are difficulties, there are barriers and all the rest, but that's the idea of what the service desk is meant to be there for, to assist in sharing that knowledge, even if it isn't to have a solution. But probably there's someone sat around this webinar as such who has gone through that and has succeeded in a different way, you know. So that's one of the things we're trying to pick up on. But back to the questions, Ben, you've had your hand up for quite a while now, so if I can pass across to you.
I just need to remember what it was I was going to say now. No, I think initially it was on the emission side of it. Yeah, I popped a wee bit in the chat there in response to Claire's question on emissions. Yeah, in general, they're all based on DFT statistics, and then the projections are based on sort of methodology there as well. I mean, if I was doing a report, I'd probably still be referencing the initial data source, the original data source. So I'd always bear that in mind. But their data sources do change as well, so we do try and make that available in our modeling as well. So there may be slight mismatch here and there, but as and when we're refreshing it, we will try and get that as up to date and relevant as possible. A couple other bits we just mentioned in the chat. We've also got some mapping solutions coming down the line. And these are looking at sort of where is suitable to install on-street charging infrastructure and the likes of that, and even looking at sort of areas of residential charging demand and looking at sort of mapping where existing charging infrastructure is as well. So that's another service that we're looking to build into Nevis as well, which will be coming down the line shortly. There's also we've also got some more articles coming into the knowledge repository constantly. Basically, I think there's a next load coming in on sort of different types of charging infrastructure, so developing on the sort of the pavement channel and the lamppost stuff that's already in, but also more on the on-street charging sort of area as well. So that will be coming down the line as well. I think that was everything that I was thinking of saying. Right with Chris or Lewis if there was anything I missed there, but yeah, I think that was me.
No, that's great.
Excellent. And Nigel, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much.
No problem.
Two things really. First was the variations across Wales. So in the rural areas and in some of the social and economically deprived areas, they're quite often quite strong communal groups who are keen on either redeveloping buildings, but there's also they also include charging and on-site renewables quite often. I think it's quite important that we somehow hook into them and enable them to get some of the knowledge sharing that's available via the toolkits that you've been showing us today. So that leads on to my next question, which was, can you remind us again, Gordon, or remind me again anyway, how we access the toolkit and what the subscription model is?
Can I pass that over to Karine at the time being?
Sorry, this is really embarrassing. I just had a message popping up on my screen and I missed the actual question. So
the question was, so I'll just paraphrase it. The question was the actual access to the insights and the knowledge repository. How do we go about doing that? I mean, there is discussions ongoing prior to this and while we're pulling it together about trying to make that available.
Yeah, so the idea is, or the plan is to obviously base again on the feedback and interest that all parties here have. I've started discussing with Chris on, quotes, etc. I made an allocation of budget for this, so I'm confident that it will be approved hopefully in the next week or two. So the idea was we were trying to find a way of making it as the simplest way possible would be to have one lead party to commission Cenex on behalf of everybody else, so that Cenex can go ahead and provide the service to all parties interested. So my view was to look at making it available to the 22 local authorities, plus the health boards and potentially other few parties that may be interested in attending this call. So yeah, so that is the plan. But obviously, and again, as I mentioned earlier, there seemed to be a way for local authorities. So if we were talking initially through WLGA, I saw a comment on this, so we may need to discuss that again. I saw a comment in the chat bar, but on this, but the idea was when I spoke with the WLGA, they talked to RCT who had exposure, I think, with this tool as well, and we were quite content to act as the lead authority on that to commission Cenex. So I think there could be an easy way in terms of the procurement and the funding of it. Is just about who is interested, and I guess Chris, maybe from a practical point of view about how that is delivered after. Maybe you can come in and explain, but I'm assuming it's everybody will have their own access to their own data.
Can I just cut in just before you respond, Chris? I've just put it back up in the chat for the Insights Toolkit. If you can actually put the thumbs up to that to say this is actually something that you do want, then we end up with that kind of empirical proof and data to kind of, so it's about 3 up now. So carry on, Chris, but I just wanted to flag that up while it was still at the bottom of the chat. If you can put the thumbs up on that one, that would be brilliant.
That's great. Thanks, Gordon. And thanks, Corinne. Yeah, so as you can imagine, Ben and Lewis and the team work on this on an ongoing basis. And so we run on a kind of annual basis. And Corinne's proposal is to give yourselves access for 12 months. The way we work this is we recognise it's not just you as individuals in your particular local authorities that might want to dive into the knowledge repository or the Insights Toolkit. So we whitelist your domain. At welshgovernment.uk or whatever. And that means that anybody from your organisation can gain access once we've whitelisted you. So when Corinne gives us the heads up, or the thumbs up, sorry, then we'll basically enable access to all the 22 Welsh local authorities. And for those of you from health or other public sector bodies, we'll probably email out and find what the best regional coverage is for you. And that means that, say, the folks in Monmouthshire, who we've mentioned lots, get to see Monmouthshire and Wales, and you don't have to be sort of clicking to select the right region. So you just get access to your data and, of course, the whole knowledge repository. If you want to register in the meantime, whilst we won't necessarily do anything about it, if you're feeling proactive today, then actually, if you just click, there's a register button near the account, and I've just dropped the web link in there. But I hope that's straightforward enough. And if you have specific questions, we're here as a resource, then happy to already try to start answering those as appropriate, and then get into the sort of the full delivery of the service once Corinne says it's hopefully good to go. Subject to ministerial sign-off, as mentioned earlier.
Yeah, what I was going to say, and maybe before anyone asked the question, so yeah, the idea, and you know how it works with budget, so annual, even though I'm trying to anticipate, your funding requirement for the following years. So with regard to this particular project, what I'm proposing is that Welsh Government fund the first 12 months. You then have really a go at it as using it the best possibly, and then once you've validated your interest in those tools, then for the following years, my idea was, but again, more than happy to rediscuss that, say maybe in 3-6 months time, once you've had the opportunity to use the tool and see how helpful it is to you, review who are interested, whether it is a general interest again, or whether it's very limited to a certain amount of organizations. And what I had in mind is if the product has really been sold to you and you see great value to it, either you support the cost going forward yourself, or we discuss again, and it might be opportunity for Welsh Government to support. But I'm not at that point yet, so open to see what the views are, maybe in a few months' time when you've had the time to look at it. If that's okay with everybody.
Thank you, Corinne. Any other questions? Martin? Martin, if you want to unmute and ask your question. No? Okay, maybe that was a mistake. Oh well, 10 minutes early. So, as we say, just a bit of a wrap up, kind of the crystal ball has been out to actually see what we actually need to do in the future, and that is very much what you guys and girls need us to actually assist you with. And what we need to do is actually make sure that we understand what's around the corner and ensure that Wales doesn't get left behind. So there's things there. There's Traws Cymru. We had mention about modes of transport and how actually we should be looking to active travel. And what we don't want to do is just have like kind of electric car traffic jams. There's an aspect there that this is a transition point. But certainly for the rural environment, there's very few people that will be able to cycle places or walk places. The car will still be an element of what's actually needed. There's POWS 1899 about accessible chargers and how we actually do that for some of the less able people. And as the kind of the Welsh population kind of gets older, it's like these things are the things that we need. And then as things are moving forward, I mean, the picture just there in the middle is BMW's induction charging. There's a lot of tech that's coming out. It makes it very difficult to actually choose any winners, to actually be 100% certain. But what we do need to do is actually link in with the future generations and the STEM and the education, because if we get this right, then the next problem we're going to have is we're going to need 40,000 electricians to be able to install and maintain this equipment. Now, it makes sense to me that we link in with the education people and we make sure that STEM is there and what we actually need. The consultations out there about the zero emission vehicle mandate and CO2 emissions. So if you click on that link, you can feed into that. And I love this slide. It's like hesitation is a risky strategy when great leaps are needed. We do actually need a step forward into this breach. And I think the way to actually do it is together. And I think we can do it really well. So if there's no other questions come up, I'd like to say, Jill, thank you to Karine, Chris, Lewis, Ben, Rachel and Steve for your time. And let me just check the chat. Is there anything come through there, or stick your hand up? Thank you very much for your time, and I've given you 10 minutes extra lunch.
Thanks, Gordon. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
thank
That's
you.
great.
Cheers. Many thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, everyone, for coming. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.